Hello, everyone. My name is John Winford. I'm a senior manager on the database services team, and I'm joined by my colleague Kapil today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kapil Kapoor. I'm with the professional services arm of AWS. Okay. What is DMA? DMA is Database Migrations Accelerator, which is a fixed fee offering to migrate a Java/.NET based application running on Oracle or SQL Server to Postgres or MySQL versions of Aurora.
Now, on top of that, we actually also support migrations to RDS Postgres and RDS MySQL. So really, you get your choice of open source engines when moving to the AWS cloud. And Kapil, we support migrations from Oracle and SQL Server. What versions do we work with? Do we go all the way back to those historical ones, or just some newer versions?
No, I think it is. They are basically not all the way back. I think it is. What we do is to SQL 2008 and above, and Oracle release 11 and above. So there are certain nuances on specific versions that we go. But yes, there is a limit to how which versions that we look at. Now, this is because this is a fixed fee slash contained offering. The idea is that there is a certain amount of assessment and qualification that occurs to see whether these workloads would qualify for this type of an offering. So yes, we have guidelines on specific versions that we will look at.
Are those guidelines I can see on the screen right now? I believe we use the database migration service and the schema conversion tool behind the scenes. Those guidelines aligned with the versions that are supported by those products?
Absolutely. They are completely aligned with them because the core offering here is usage of our own tools that are publicly available. So this offering doesn't really have any other component that is not publicly available. The magic sauce in this offering is the combination of the offerings that Amazon has, how we use them in a collaborative manner, in a very prescriptive and collaborative manner for our customers.
Makes sense. And in the end, I see on the right, the customers get back a refactored application database. So I guess that means the app is up and running on a modern cloud native source running in their account. Is that correct?
So the point is that the offering is the DMA offering core is going to be taking the customer's application and database and basically refactored, and it'll be the customer's responsibility to take it into production. And we'll go over that details in later on in the slides. But essentially, it'll be a working copy of the application, QA tested with representative data set. And that's from there on, the customer will be responsible for taking it to production.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's get into it.
Okay. Now, what is involved in migrating an application? And we kind of created, based on our historical migration of thousands of applications and databases at Amazon and outside and our customers, and it is essentially into these major buckets. So clearly analyzing the application, determining the complexity, and the migration strategy is, the initial part, which is, roughly 10% of the workload. About schema, when we say schema migration, this essentially is the database changes, right? Core changes to the database itself. That fluctuates between 8 and 10%. So we marked it at 8%. Now, majority of the changes do occur in the application tier. And this is not a surprise because, the application changes are, database specific code that is embedded in the application tier, which is harder to determine. It's proprietary at times. It has business logic. So it's not easy for consultants or third party, companies to come in and determine the changes, test them thoroughly, etc. So therefore, that's majority of the time. When we say quality assurance is 10%, that's basically unit tested and QA testing of the work that is done so far. Now, the portions in the white are the ones that are not part of our core DMA offering, and those are very important to kind of notice at this point, is that the UAT, which is users acceptance testing, we factored a 20% number for the time it would take to do UAT. That is because historically we've seen that it's not the sheer act of testing that takes so long, but it is a sheer number of time it takes in accepting the changes that occur because of all the changes that we made, right? So it's basically adoption, change management, and accepting of all these changes by the users. That's what it takes, that sort of a time. And typically, many companies, they kind of stop a cycle before that. Now, that's why we have that our DMA offering, the DMA core offering, stops just before the UAT cycle. Now, the data migration piece, the 12% of that should not be confused with the data that would be included as our initial, when we are actually doing all the portions in the blue, because that data migration is full data conversion. So what we do in our DMA offering is converting a representative data set, but we don't do full data conversion. So that additional data migration or data conversion is left out as an additional step that customers could do it themselves or engage us for, let's say, an additional activity. And the
Now
last 10%.
that data migration piece, I mean, when we're doing testing and development of it, we could be working on a complete copy of that data set, right? It's just, the production data migration cutover, that's up to the customer, or is it an additional offering to do that live migration cutover, but it's going to be a fully tested, validated data set that we're using as part of the development for DMA, right?
Yeah, we could be. So there would be a time where we could say, look, we, our DMA offering, we work with a complete data set or a partial data set. Regardless, it would be a representative data set. But you're absolutely right, John. It wouldn't be the final, the delta between at the time when we took a copy versus what the time when it is ready for production. It could be a few weeks. So the delta between those few weeks of that next change of data, that wouldn't be part of this, and therefore that is left out as an additional step, right? Now that
Yeah.
delta could be a large delta or it could be a small delta, but there will be a delta. And
And
that's
all of this makes complete sense if you think about it, because what if you had confidential information in your data set? You're not necessarily going to want to share that with us at Amazon. So working with a representative data set is a good way to essentially be a happy medium between doing it all versus doing what's necessary to get the migration done.
correct. And in some cases, the customers may ask us to mask the data, right? That they don't want us to have any visibility to any data. Maybe it's PII or something else that they just don't want us to have access to it. So it could be cases like that where we completely work on masked data. And at the end, when we're doing full data conversion, or whoever's doing that full data conversion is obviously going to be working on the actual data and not masked data.
Makes sense. And just sort of another thing I want to bring up on this chart, like one of the beauties about DMA, as I understand it, is it's a fixed price migration. So even if these percentages vary a bit, I mean, we're still going to deliver the product to the customer in the end, right?
Absolutely. And then the idea here is that this is what we've seen as what our implementations or migrations have been. Now, there are customers out there where they will see that these percentages are different for them, because that depends on the maturity of their customer. It depends on maturity of the products, or the complexity of the products, rather, that we're trying to migrate. But these are just raw averages that are directionally correct. By no means anybody should take that this is exactly how it would be. For example, in some cases, the application migration would not be 30%. It could only be 15% because the application has no embedded SQLs at all. It is completely written in a format that everything is run by ODBC or JDBC, and there is nothing there in the application code that needs to be changed. All the complexity lies in the database. Now that happens to be a rare phenomena, but that it could happen. where the schema conversion takes a lot longer than the application migration. So, but the point is, these are averages that we've seen.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
I just want to talk one more second about production cutover, is that what we've seen is that the delta between by the time the application is fully converted, some customers take their own time to move that into production because there are other levers that come into play, such as a quarter end cycle or some other business compelling event that would, impede an application from actually going live. So therefore, purposely, we have carved it out of our DMA offering because we don't want to tie the customer to force the customer to actually cut over these applications to production based on our timing. So therefore, we've given them the leverage that, look, we give you the flexibility to do the production cutover yourself. If you want to engage us, yes, we absolutely can do that as an additional, let's say, an offering that we have. We'll discuss later. But the point is that as a part of core DMA, it is best to kind of leave that out. And I just wanted to point that piece out here. Okay. Okay. So John, you want to start with the slide?
Sure. So, where do we get going with the DMA process? Well, pretty much goes without saying that we're going to start by taking a look at the application and making sure that it fits within the guardrails of something that we can do with DMA. DMA isn't meant to be the be-all end-all solution to every possible migration out there. There are some very complex migrations that we've done at AWS in the past, both with the professional services team that Kapil's part of and our partners. These can be migrations that take many months, if not more. Amazon DMA is targeted towards those applications that we can easily qualify and fit into guardrails, if you will, that we can feel confident can be migrated within a fixed price and a fixed timeline. So what is it we're going to start with? Well, it's a 4-step process. We're going to start with assessment and qualification, move forward into refactoring before we move on to, of course, quality assurance and making sure that it's all done. Generally speaking, what does this get you? Well, it gets you decreased risk, time, and effort in comparison to doing it yourself manually. What do we need? Well, it goes without saying that really we're going to need access to the application code to take a look at what's there. Look at a representative sample of the source database. Again, remember we're not looking to be analyzing the data per se for what's in there. Much more looking at the structure of the database, if you will. We're going to be doing a migration from a non-production environment to a non-production environment. Now, we're going to say non-production with quotes in it. It depends on exactly how you structure your environments up. Whether you have a dev test prod, whether you have UAT environments, what have you. Really what this means is we want to work only with something that is not your live prod environment. It doesn't have to be specifically one environment or another. It doesn't need to be your UAT only, but just something that's not currently in use by your business users at your company. So we're going to take a look, see that it all makes sense, and of course the other thing that we need is something to say, hey, this migration has worked or it hasn't, and that's going to be this acceptance test criteria. So we want to know what it is that you're going to look for to say, hey, this migration worked or it didn't. In the end, we're going to deliver a refactored application, again deployed in a non-production environment. So I want to circle back around to what Kapil said about the data migration. We're going to be migrating a representative data set. That data set might look nothing like your production data set because it's been completely masked and only has 10% of the rows, or it might literally be a copy of the database at the start of when we did this migration. And then to go live, all you're going to need to do is replicate the changes that have occurred since that data snapshot was taken. We're going to deliver validated test cases, and of course, the ability to take add-on options from professional services to do that live migration cutover. If you wanted to do some additional training and certification, or just learn more about a particular product in AWS, even if it isn't in the guise of an official certification course. But at a high level, that's it. You give us access to your app, and then we'll do all the hard work for you and return it to you working in your own AWS cloud environment. I think I've covered everything there, Bill.
Yes, I just wanted to kind of underscore one point that is pretty important here is the acceptance test criteria. That what is also important besides from just understanding what would be acceptable from an test criteria perspective for the customer is what kind of a documented test scripts that you would give to us, right? Because our folks will not be experts in the business logic of the customer's applications. And this offering will dabble into business logic, right? Because we are changing the application code itself. Typically, what Amazon has done in the past, and then you look at our tools, they center around technology only. So it is making technical changes in the database essentially. Here, our offering also includes, retrofitting the business logic in the application tier, right? Therefore, in order to complete that cycle, we will need to see how would one test it once the application changes are made. How would we really test it? So over and above the criteria, we would also need specifically the test cases and test scenarios and actually test scripts if they are available, whether automated or manual. So the quality of the test scripts, let's say the acceptance criteria of those test scripts itself, so we can actually potentially run them and see, once the changes have been made, how will that really flow. So that is something that I don't want to kind of leave any ambiguity there, that's going to be a very important piece of our qualification criteria when we look at which workloads actually do qualify for this or not.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think we have up next a few slides on just what is the qualifications. So maybe we should jump into that.
Correct. Yeah. So John, this is something that you can start and I can finish off on the categorization. I think it's a very important part, right?
Sure. So yeah, behind the scenes, to determine what sort of application qualifies for Amazon DMA, we use something that we developed at Amazon called the Workload Qualification Framework, or WQF. What the WQF is, it's a 5-point grading system that gauges migration complexity. Essentially, what we're doing is we're looking at both the database itself as well as the applications using it, and analyzing what's in there, what are all the complex linkages, what are the access methods being used, how many stored procedures, functions, triggers there are, how many tables exist in the database, and essentially looking at all of this and putting it into a bucket, if you will, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It's not totally black and white as to, if it's precisely 500 tables and then you get to 501, you'll immediately switch from category 1 to category 2. That's not it at all. It requires us taking a look at it, running some analysis using the Schema conversion tool, and determining how much of it can be converted automatically. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to take that analysis and determine whether or not we can convert the application and database using the Amazon DMA.
Correct. And I think the idea is that we will stick to the category 1 and 2 only, just to underscore. I know it's already been said, but that's the qualification of this is that it's for now it is category 1 and 2 only that we're looking at as the ones that would actually qualify for DMA.
And to just give an example, when you move up the scope to category 5. When we say non-portable, these are applications that software vendors have built specifically for a given database and have certified on that database. So it's not like you can take a packaged application that has been provided to you by a third party and swap out the back end and make it work on open source. I mean, that'd be great if we could remove every commercial database from every application and get it to work on open source. Quote unquote, the world would be at a better place, right? Because we wouldn't be paying all those high licensing fees. But Amazon DMA, its main focus is applications that you own the source code for and can be converted from one database engine to another, because you in the end are certifying that, yeah, this works. We're good to go forward. We're not relying on any third party to do that.
Absolutely. And the complex ERPs and stuff like that, which are absolutely proprietary and have very tightly coupled between the application and databases, are examples of category 5, which are obviously not worth a conversation at this point in time. Okay. Now let's move on to the application architecture. And as John said earlier, one of the things that we look for is essentially the innate complexity of the application tier itself, right? How is it load balanced? How many tiers? What does the web tier look like? And other environments other application, or let's say architecture components that come into play, right? There is no, at this point, it is not a hard and fast rule that these things would disqualify an application for moving, except that we will have a template that we want the customers to fill out so that we can properly assess where the complexities are. So there is no, just to kind of underscore, there is no specific set of, let's say, criteria where we would say this would be disqualified from being part of a DMA offering. It's just that we just need to know what the complexity is, so that when we actually do build this out, when this application is complete for testing, we are able to actually properly build that on AWS itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, really, when we're looking at DMA, it's not like we say, to qualify for DMA, it's one database and one application only. If you had 3 applications that were all small in size talking to one database, that can still easily qualify for counting as sort of one overall workload being migrated as part of a DMA migration. Likewise, if you had one gigantic database that had no applications attached to it at all, but it was just far too complicated, we wouldn't be able to fit that in the guardrails that would meet a WQF1 or WQF2 type migration. So yeah, like Phil said, we've got a lot of flexibility. We just need to take a look at it, do some analysis, and say, look, this is something we can migrate with DMA.
Now, this is something very, very pivotal to the whole conversation, which is our usage of the schema conversion tool, right? This is the core step in us using or migrating or converting, different terminologies here when we actually convert databases and application tier. Now, this is, an offering schema conversion tool is a free tool that is free to download for all our customers and partners alike. And in this offering, we actually will be using this tool also. John, do you want to go detail this out, or?
Yeah, sure. So I think now's a good point. Maybe some of you guys are looking at this and going, well, hold on, I can just go download SCT myself. And one of the beauties about SCT is that it's a free product. Absolutely nothing that we're doing as part of Amazon DMA is something that you couldn't do yourself. But what we're doing at Amazon is bringing together the tools and technology that we offer to you in conjunction with migration experts to provide a fixed price, defined timeline migration. So, we use the same tools, the same technology. So therefore, to do some assessment and qualification, we're going to run the schema conversion tool against the database to take a look to see if it is actually feasible to run. It's no special version that we use internally. We're actually probably going to ask you to run the SCT report and send it to us to determine if this application works for DMA. And one of the great things about SCT is it can tell you a whole wealth of information about your system. It will tell you how much can be easily converted from one database engine to another. It'll break it down by the basic database schema into the procedures, the functions, other aspects of the database, and say, look, this is easy to convert or this is hard to convert. Or maybe if you're not even thinking about a conversion, it does some other really interesting things. Like say you're running a commercial database such as Oracle, it might look at it and go, well, you're not actually using any enterprise features in your database. So if you move to say RDS Oracle Standard Edition, you could save yourself some money there. But that's as a bit of an aside. What we use it for is we'll take a look at the number of objects that can be automatically converted versus the number that require manual conversion. Drill into it in some more detail, because sometimes, it might look like there's 1,000 manual steps that need to be done to convert your database, but the reality of it is 999 of those are exactly the same thing, just across different objects. And go, hey, yeah, this is something that can be done with DMA, or it's not going to really fit into the WQF 1 or 2 categories and might be better served by a partner or ProServe standard type engagement.
What you just said, John, kind of compelled me to say what I'm going to say is that, we have what we are doing with our offering DMA is not proprietary at all. It is, basically all the stuff that it is open for customers and partners alike to download and use. So it is kind of like we are following a particular recipe, and the ingredients are open source ingredients, right? And even the recipe is available to all. So it is not in our interest to basically have this offering that nobody can replicate. In fact, if the customers want to replicate what we're doing as DMA themselves, we actually would help them, right? We just think that this is a very easy way to basically use our open source components that are out there to convert your commercial databases to open source. And we are going to start this as an offering, and if the customers can adopt doing it themselves, absolutely we will help the customers to basically do it themselves as well.
Good point. We are all about making it easy for you to move to the cloud. And the reason behind DMA is simply that we appreciate that not everybody has infinite time and bandwidth to get everything done, or perhaps don't have the expertise in-house to convert that stored procedure from one language to another. So it's just an offering. There's no black magic. We're just here to make it easier.
Okay. Now, I think this is relatively quick side. This is, the more on schema conversion tool and how the report looks like. We would actually be looking at the output of the schema conversion tool that, we would do initially in our assessment phase to see where the complexities are, and the numbers of these changes that the SCT cannot automatically do would determine the WQF complexity. And this is basically one of the qualification criteria, is that it has to be either in category 1 or 2. But these are essentially the schema components of the database that we look at.
Exactly. And if you run this report yourself, don't jump to any conclusions. If you see a whole lot of red, it's not always as bad as it seems. Like I mentioned, sometimes the counts can be a bit deceptive if you have many of the same error. And again, we don't zero in on how many objects are in the database, right? So whether you have 10 or 1,000 objects, that's really only one factor in whether or not it qualifies for DMA. Just do reach out. We're happy to take a look and let you know if it's something that we think is appropriate and we can give you a hand with.
Okay. Now, let's go to refactoring. This is where rubber would meet the road in terms of hands-on keyboard making changes to the application and databases. Okay.
Indeed. So yeah, refactoring. I'd say this is where the magic happens, but we've already been pretty open that there is no magic. We just have a very highly skilled group of experts in database conversion here at AWS. I mean, it makes sense. We've been doing these sorts of migrations for years, both internally and externally with our customers. I'm sure everyone's seen, one of our big announcements that happened a while back where Amazon has got fully off of Oracle internally. And I can tell you, having been the largest Oracle user, or one of the largest Oracle users, if we can do it, everybody can do it. But by going through that exercise, we certainly learned a few things, and we just apply that knowledge and making it publicly available to you now. So yeah, there's two key steps in a refactoring. Obviously, there's the database object conversion and then the application code conversion. Kapil, do you want to dive into that a bit more?
Yes. So the database is essentially a contained exercise, as in we know prescriptively it's Oracle or SQL Server to Aurora, and the changes are known, etc. So that, to me, and even if you remember the pie chart that we showed, that is a smaller bit of the exercise. The complexity is mostly in the application code, where even though we say it's Java or .NET, it is the complexity, the business logic that comes into play, and the embedded SQLs that are sometimes part of the application code. So to me, it is how well versed and how engaged the customers, application businesses or applications teams rather, are going to be involved with us. How good are their documented test procedures and execution procedures and standard operating procedures that'll make it easy for us collectively to make these changes.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And we do a lot of these changes automatically with SCT as well, don't we? Because SCT not only converts database application code or database code, but it also converts code that's in applications itself, right?
Absolutely, and that's why for the very initial offering we chose .NET and Java, because Schema Conversion Tool works well with both those tiers, and it does a very good job in making those changes automatically as well. It's just that when it comes to testing and making sure the users do accept those changes, that's where the complexity is. But otherwise, Schema Conversion Tool does a pretty good job with those two platforms.
Now, having been involved in the Schema Conversion Tool, I can tell you that it does a pretty good job with that application code conversion, but there's always things that could be done better. To give you an idea, if you've built some really complicated dynamic SQL statements inside your app code, where you're piecing together different bits of the query from 5 different places, SCT maybe isn't going to do the best job of converting that, and there's going to be a bit more in the way of manual work that'll need to be done to get that app code converted. But if history has shown me anything, it's that most people take a fairly straightforward approach when interacting with the database through their application layer. So SCT in general can do a pretty good job of converting it automatically. And even if not, like I mentioned, we've got a skill group version done.
Essentially testing, but let's go through the details. John, you want to start with this?
Sure.
On what we will do in this cycle?
Yeah. So Kapil talked a bit about testing earlier on, and also zeroed in on what we work with for the data set. So we're going to take that representative data set, load it into the now converted database, and use that as the basis for testing. Now, you're going to go, hold on, how are you going to load this data set into a new database? It was, for example, a SQL Server data set, and I've now asked you to migrate it to RDS Postgres. How are you going to load it in? Well, behind the scenes, not only are we using the schema conversion tool to convert the database schema and any of the code that's in your application, but we're also going to be using the database migration service to move the data from your original database to your new one. And one of the beauties about DMS is that it can move data between different database engines. In fact, you're generally not going to use it for a like-to-like migration. You're going to use it if you're trying to switch from one database engine to another. Or just as an aside, a lot of people use DMS for replicating into data lakes, for example. But one of the things is, we're going to do these migrations for you. And as we mentioned, we're going to be using a representative data set. But at the end, you'll have access to that DMS instance as well, because of course, it's your instance. And you could just run those same scripts again, or same tasks, I should say, against your production database to do your final production cutover. So we're going to take this representative data set and use it to go through all of the tests that you highlighted are needed to validate your application post-conversion.
Yes, absolutely. And I think just to finish this off, right, this would be the cue for your acceptance teams, whether it is us or your SIs or your company, your internally run teams who would actually take this to the users to get the system accepted by them. This would be a very good, let's say, pile of work in terms of test scripts and data and executed plans, etc., to take it to that team to now run the full formal UAT at the right time. Because UAT, as I stated earlier, it is a question of when the users are available, when they're accepting to actually make these changes into the production environment, because it needs to be done with full data, and also the delta or the net changes between the time when we started the application changes to the time now that we are getting ready to move it to production. So this is actually a pretty important step, or a pretty important input into that step.
For sure, but at this point, the database and the application have been fully converted and tested using the criteria that we were provided, and it's now available to you, the customer, in your account to validate and use as you see fit. So all the hard legwork, if you will, has been done at this point.
Correct. It's a fully running, operating environment that has been QA tested, and the results of those testing have been documented based on a criteria that was pre-agreed upon prior to us beginning any work. So this is kind of like coming to a full cycle here on what it is, and that kind of brings us to the next step of what is beyond DMA. What is it that would happen, or what is it that the customers would need to do beyond what this particular offering is? And I'll kind of start this off is that, as John was saying, now that this is fully complete, what do customers do from here? Because then essentially the three steps there are full data conversion, as in if we chose a partial data for this particular application, the next step is obviously to do a full data conversion. Or if we already did full data conversion before, which is also a possibility, this full data conversion here would be just the net changes to the data that would have happened in the last several weeks of the time when we did, basically take this application from the customer and making changes. So regardless, there would be a data conversion cycle or a step that would happen. Now, a DMA Plus is basically the offering that customers can use to do this full data conversion as part of this offering. UAT. Now again, this is something that customers or the partners sometimes assume this step and typically don't involve AWS typically in this cycle. But as a part of DMA Plus, wanted to bring that out, that this is a possibility that we can also do it for you, where we can actually run the entire UAT, as in working with your user base, to have them formally adopt and approve of the changes that have been made by us, and and inclusive of adopting all the data changes that would have occurred, because there are data changes also between, let's say, Oracle and SQL Server to Aurora, for example. So adopting all of those changes. And finally is a production cutover. Now, this typically happens over a very short amount of time, typically 1 or 2 days, typically a weekend, where formally the old database is formally switched off and all the integration points are repointed to the new environment in AWS that is now running completely on a new technology stack. So that piece of work is called production cutover, and typically that is also something that historically we haven't done, but as a part of this DMA Plus offering, we are offering this as a choice for customers to engage AWS to do this as well. So these three things are the final completion step that would take the fully converted application workload that we discussed in the presentation today into production, and that offering is DMA Plus. Any other questions on it?
No, I think we've covered it fairly good. Like we mentioned, what we're going to deliver with you with DMA is a fully functional operating environment working with a representative data set. And if you need our help to move over into full production cutover, we are there and willing to assist you if you want it. But overall, we're looking for this to be an easy button, if you will. Make it simple for you to move to the cloud, leverage our experts, and hopefully make that migration as smooth and seamless as it could possibly be. So thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully you found this interesting, and you've been asking questions throughout and whatever else. But if you have any other further questions after the presentation, or you're watching this in a pre-recorded manner later on, do reach out to your account team or the Contact Us form on the AWS website. Yeah, thank you very much. Kapil, anything?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And again, as John said, we are happy to engage and assist in any capacity, and reach out to the account teams and directly to us if that is necessary. And we are happy to jump in and assist you as we strongly feel that this is in the best interest of our customers to go to open source using this sort of an offering.